Hey, what's up everybody? It's the Hyphenate here, and today we're going to talk about neutral density filters or ND filters, why you should use them, and how to use them. The point of an ND filter is to cut light. It's kind of like window tinting. You can still see through it, but it lessens the amount of light that passes through. And with an ND filter, you can cut the light without having to adjust any settings on your camera. Now, there are different strengths of ND filters that cut different amounts of light. 1-stop, 2-stop, and so on. There are also variable ND filters, which I personally really like to use. These allow you to actually rotate a ring that's here in the ND filter and change the amount of light that it cuts. So by rotating the filter, you can actually cut more or less light. Variable NDs definitely make life a lot easier, especially for video. So here's a Tiffin variable ND filter. Now here's the current shot that we have. And now this is with the variable ND filter on. And this is at the minimum setting. So this is cutting just a little bit of light. Now let's increase it to cut more light. And you can see it's getting darker. And now we're opening it back up. Now let's take off the filter. And now you can see our exposure the way we had it. Now, one thing that I do want to mention with these variable ND filters, right now I'm pointing at the light. If you start to use it too strong, you'll see that it starts to create these patterns or these vignettes. So you never really want to use a variable ND filter too strong. It's going to have really bad effects on your image. So you want to get close to the edge, the maximum amount, and then dial it back just a little bit. Now, there are two different types of ND filters in regards to how you use them on a camera. You can either get the ones that have a threading on it to put directly onto a lens, or they have another kind that's more square or rectangular that you need some type of adapter or matte box that you can place them into. Now, personally, I prefer the ones that thread directly into the lens. Now, why would you want to use this extra piece of glass to cut light instead of just cutting light in your camera settings? Now, if you're not familiar with the exposure triangle and the fundamental settings for cameras, video, and photo, I do have videos that break that down. Link in the description, so make sure to check that out if you are not too familiar. But if you are familiar, then you know shutter speed, ISO, aperture are the key components to getting a proper exposure. Now, when you're shooting video, you know that you don't want your shutter speed to be higher than it should be. In video, if you're shooting 24 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be 1/48th or 1/50th of a second. If you're shooting 30 frames per second, then 1/60th of a second shutter speed. If you're shooting 60 frames per second, then 1/20th or 1/25th of a second shutter speed, etc. You also want your ISO as low as possible to get the cleanest possible image. And when it comes to your aperture, you want it generally pretty wide in video so you have more background separation. Now, unfortunately with that, if you're shooting outdoors, you're gonna often be overexposing. Everything's gonna be blown out. It's gonna be too bright under those settings. Now, you can increase your aperture to cut light, but then you are losing some of that shallow depth of field. And then you can increase your shutter speed to cut light, but then you're not getting that smooth, natural motion blur. And that's where ND filters really come in handy. If you can't control the amount of light that's in your scene and it's too bright, then you're gonna need to use an ND filter or a variable ND filter, like I said, I prefer to use, so you can really dial in that perfect exposure while maintaining all the settings in your camera. Now, I very rarely shoot video with extremely bright lights indoors, so I don't really need an ND filter indoors most of the time, but outside I almost never shoot without a variable ND filter. Now, when it comes to photography, you can just increase your shutter speed. As most things that we shoot, we actually want everything to be kind of more frozen. We want portraits or sports to be locked in and not have a lot of motion blur. But if you're shooting something a little bit more artistic, or you have a slower shutter speed, or if you're doing long exposure photography and you want those streaks of light from cars or smooth waterfalls, smooth water in lakes, if you want motion blur, then the best way to cut light is also an ND filter. So really you want to reach for one of these. Once you've dialed in your settings the way you want them in camera, your shutter speed, your ISO, your aperture, and then if you need to cut light after having the settings that you want, then use the ND filter. Now, one thing I do want to mention is when it comes to getting ND filters or variable ND filters that have threads on them that you mount directly onto your camera, if you have a variable ND filter that doesn't fit, you can always get a step-up ring, which is essentially an adapter that's going to allow you to mount a bigger size ND filter onto a lens with a smaller thread. Now, that's something that I actually do because I like to have a bigger size variable ND filter that fits across all my lenses. So the lenses that have smaller threads, I just have step-up rings for all of those lenses, so I can use the same variable ND filter instead of buying a bunch of different sizes. You do not want a smaller size variable ND filter than the thread size that's on your lens. In my bag, I do carry 2 different sets of variable ND filters at different strengths. So I have one that's more of a low to medium strength, and then another one that's a medium to high. So there you guys have it. That's a quick breakdown of ND filters or variable ND filters and why they are important for video and photo. If you're interested in getting any of the gear that I use, including ND filters that I recommend, I do have links in the description where you can purchase them. It doesn't change the price you get it at, but it does help this channel. Hopefully this video helped you. If it did, please drop a like on this video, drop a comment below if you have any questions, and please make sure to subscribe. I have a lot more videos coming soon. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.